Welcome back to whenweare.org. Everything we post is for entertainment purposes only. I think you know what that means. We're answering or addressing a comment today. I was going to show the name, but then I thought maybe they don't want me to show their name, or maybe they would at some time in the future not appreciate me using the name. So I cropped their name, although I'll leave the original comment in the comment section, so that gives them the option of removing it and remaining anonymous or leaving it up. Anyway, I really do appreciate all comments and questions. That's how we learn. I've picked up or learned some details from people who I disagree with on bigger issues. So it just goes to show we can always learn something from each other. We should keep an open mind. So there were two charts that this commenter left that shows, first of all, that they are a true truth seeker. Their breakdown and analysis and process of elimination and ability to footnote and be so concise in laying out their beliefs is remarkable. I envy it. So I hope you don't see me as argumentative. I'm simply going to bring out what I do agree with and where I disagree with some things that I think are very much overlooked. And there are major biblical reasons why I disagree, and I'll try and share those concisely. First of all, you say it's not Satan's season, but God's season. I know where you're coming from, and that really is a translation issue, and I agree. The King James Bible, for example, uses Satan's little season, and it's not my favorite translation, but I don't think it's inaccurate, and I think it's what most people use and are familiar with who are part of the little season community. And so for that reason, I don't disagree with the use of it. And it's what most people, I think it comes from a good place too, your reason, because I'm assuming I kind of thought that as well, that it could insinuate that Satan's in control. But in no way is that true. And that should be understood right up front. It is a time that God has allowed Satan to have to test us, but God is in control. So to begin with, and most importantly, we agree that there was a deception in our history, and the Millennial Reign of Christ has already taken place, and we are currently living during the short period of time that God allows Satan to mislead mankind once again. And we agree that the short period of time is probably nearing its end. So on many important points, we agree. The biggest thing we disagree on, because it does end up making the biggest difference, is who built those beautiful buildings. I believe most people who are and have looked into Satan's little season all insinuate that the buildings from the mud flood or Tartarian buildings were built by those Christ was ruling over. That, however, just does not fit in with Scripture for several reasons. And of course, the Tartarian griffin is on a lot of the buildings, which is on their flag. And of course, that points to the Tartarian nation, the worldly nation or last world power after Rome. Let me say this first too. This may not be true in your case. I'm not insinuating that it is. It's in general my observation. The reason I believe most people overlook the detail about the architecture and believe it is from Christ is because they're holding on to another religious lie that they've been taught by their church, which they believe has religious authority over them. So it is a catch-22 trap that most people can't sort out. And I explain it in more detail in my video entitled, "What did Jesus really mean by the meek shall inherit the earth?" It is a non-debunkable truth that only a little flock or small number of humans were to be born again to go to heaven. Their going to heaven was not to hang out with God throughout eternity. It was for the sole purpose, as expressed, to rule with Christ as kings and priests for 1,000 years. That truth cannot be debunked. You can say you don't believe it. You can say, well, I just know I'm going to heaven. I understand. But consider this, Revelation 21, 3 and 4. New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven to the earth. This is described as God spreading his tent over the earth. It says God himself will be with mankind, not the other way around. Verse 4 says death will be no more. If you have humans on earth and you have to die to go to heaven, but God does away with death, how many people will be going to heaven from that time forward, once God's kingdom is established on earth? 0. So can you see the awkward scenario or catch-22 for those believing everyone is still going to heaven? You would have to deny the very purpose of New Jerusalem, or God's purpose for the earth, and those beautiful prophecies which describe it. The prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 of the statue that Daniel interprets clearly represents human rulership up to it being destroyed and replaced by God's kingdom. So here's the big question or detail we have to consider. And then what? Christ rules for 1,000 years, then quietly goes away, and Satan takes over ruling the whole world again? We just considered Revelation 21, 3 and 4. There is no indication there that New Jerusalem comes down, spreads a tent over the earth, and then quietly goes away at some time. Let's read Daniel chapter 2 and look at this prophecy. And this is a good prophecy, too, that brings up another point that the commenter mentioned, that Christ began ruling in 70 A.D. That can't be true, according to this prophecy in Daniel. Again, the prophecy describes the world powers, human rulership, from the head of gold representing Babylon to Medo-Persia, to Greece, to the legs being Rome, but there's still one body part, the feet. So Rome was not the world power when Christ began ruling and destroyed human rulership. There was one final world power which seems to fit perfectly with Tartaria. But to answer that question, what then? Would God's kingdom quietly go away? Daniel 2:44. Let's back up to 43 so you can see in context. We're talking about the feet. Whereas you beheld iron mixed with moist clay, they will come to be mixed with the offspring of mankind, and they will not prove to be sticking together, this one to that one, as iron is not mixing with molded clay. And in the days of those kings, that is, the rulership or world power represented by the feet, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be brought to ruin. And the kingdom itself will not be passed on to any other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it itself will stand to times indefinite. For as much as you beheld, out of the mountain a stone was cut not by hands, and it crushed the iron, the copper, the molded clay, the silver, the gold. The grand God himself has made known to the king what is to occur after this, and the dream is reliable, and the interpretation of it is trustworthy. So I ask you all, from this explanation, once God's kingdom begins ruling, is there any indication that it will stop ruling over the earth and disappear? Absolutely not. It is here to stay. So because that clearly has to be true, where is it today? That takes us to the next conspiracy theory: geographic deception. So I've talked about geographic deception, and what I really mean is flat Earth. I avoided stating it that way or that plainly until now for the benefit of those who may be new to considering conspiracy theories and who are first trying to wrap their head around Satan's little season. And if someone then also says, hey, you need to check out flat Earth too, that may be the tipping point for some to put on the brakes and not look into Satan's little season. And that's exactly what Satan hopes ones would do. And that's why I've avoided stating it so plainly, although it's obvious what I mean, isn't it? And you can't hide that fact forever. And so there it is. The truth of the matter is all conspiracy theories are tied together into the mother of all conspiracy theories, which is God's kingdom is ruling right now on this earth. Geographic deception hides its physical location. The globe lie hides its physical location. Historic deception hides the fact that it has begun ruling time-wise, because if you believed it wasn't time for God's kingdom, you wouldn't be looking for it. Or if you believed, like some, as we mentioned, believed that it would rule and then go away, then there again, you wouldn't be looking for it. And of course, religious deception plays a major role during Satan's little season, having one still believing they're going to heaven when the actual beautiful reality is that the kingdom is down here already on this glorious earth. It seems for some, because they have been taught since infancy that they're going to heaven to be with God, that is their belief. They will not consider any other reality that doesn't include them going to heaven. And because they've believed that for so long, to consider the glorious, beautiful hope of living forever on a paradise earth seems like a letdown to them. So imagine that true scenario. If all of what we said is true, and I believe it is, Satan would actually be successful at causing ones to see the true glorious hope that God holds out to humans, his original purpose for Adam and Eve, as something to be viewed with disdain. It's kind of like when the Israelites called the miraculous bread God's provision that rained down from heaven, that sustained them in the wilderness. Some called it contemptible bread. The false teaching that all good people go to heaven, or another religious lie that goes hand in hand with that, the other option that churches teach, that is hellfire, that is the teaching that God will keep the wicked alive for the purpose of torturing them throughout eternity. I have a video talking about that too, entitled, Is Hell Really a Place of Fiery Torment? Not at all. So what Satan is doing through these religious lies today is the old made you look trick. Look up to heaven. That's where you're all going. Or the only other option, look down to hell. That's where you'll go if you don't go there. But he has you believing those are the only two options. Made you look up to heaven, look down to hell. Don't look over there at God's kingdom on earth, God's original and inevitable purpose for the earth that is in fact already here. No, don't look over there. And that's where God actually is, isn't it? Because according to Revelation 21, it says God himself will be with them. So here's an obvious danger that I see from my perspective as one who does not think he's going to heaven. If I die, I believe like Daniel, I will go to sleep in the dust of the earth. However, I would hope to wake up or receive a resurrection back to a paradise earth. If we're living like I believe we are when God's kingdom is ruling on this earth, that is the hope we should be directing people to, being a subject of that existing kingdom. If the only purpose for going to heaven is to be a king and a priest with God, it is a very presumptuous thing to proclaim that hope if in fact the number is filled. Anyone professing that hope, if the number is filled, would in fact be an impostor or in opposition to the reality of God's kingdom. So getting that teaching right is no small detail. Even if done in ignorance, it could be excusable and even understandable if someone was taught that their whole life from infancy. If, however, one was presented with the truth, but continued to proclaim their hope, would that start to make a difference as to culpability? I think so. Especially if out of pride, one didn't want to let go of their once beloved religious belief after being presented with the truth many times. Think in context of Revelation 22:15. There it mentions the things God hates, along with fornication and murderers. It includes everyone liking and carrying on a lie. Now that could include all kinds of lies. However, we're talking about this lie. It's certainly understandable if we're taught from infancy that we could die and be with God throughout eternity in heaven. It's easy to see why ones would like and believe that. It sounds beautiful. But is it true according to Bible teaching? We just reviewed many scriptures that destroys that teaching as a lie. Do we, however, like it? Do we like it and carry it on? Do you see now if we carry it on how it can start to affect other people too? So it really is a belief we need to nail down. From my perspective, I see ones who like and carry on that lie as surrounding or encircling the beloved city and the camp of the holy ones. In a spiritual sense, you're hiding or obscuring God's kingdom. And when you blind a person spiritually, they don't look for it physically. With my channel, I've chosen to focus first on religious deception because it is the most egregious and therefore the most important thing for me to cover. I will eventually produce some videos about flat earth and the false history narrative. I made my decision with regard to what I would focus on for this reason. This is how I reason on it. If Satan took a true servant of God and plucked them out of their environment, shook them up, spun them around, so that they lost track of physically where they were, we could liken that to geographic deception. If Satan also hid that person in a cave so that they lost track of days, the cycles of the sun, we could liken that to chronological deception or historic deception. If a true servant of God became thoroughly deceived in both of those ways, that would not in itself make a true servant of God disapproved by God, would it? After all, the true servant didn't ask to be deceived in those ways. If, however, because of historic and geographic deception, the true servant started believing prophecy inaccurately, and believing inaccurate prophecy led them to fellowshipping with ones they thought were their true brothers, but really weren't. If through fellowshipping with false brothers they started to adopt false teachings, now that could very well cause a servant of God to fall into the state of being disapproved by God. I don't mean to offend anyone by putting down a person's religion. The reality is all those who are waking up to the truth about where we are in history, living during Satan's little season, we've all been in religions that were teaching things that were not true because that religion didn't understand we were living in a major time of conspiracy. Adjustments in beliefs need to be made as we perceive reality and what actually is true. It can be uncomfortable. What is the goal, however? To hold on to the truth as you perceived it at one time? Or do you really want to know what is true? Like the movie The Matrix, once you make the decision to know the truth, you have to go down into the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And there's no going back. Once you know, and one conspiracy leads to another. So just like the puzzle analogy, one truth precipitates another or leads to another. It is a matter of if this, then that. If this is true, then that has to be true. You can't have things both ways most times. So we see the buildings that were here during the mud flood. Based on the number of buildings, there was a large population. And that population was more advanced than we are today. We say more advanced because we don't build such sophisticated buildings like that anymore. So we realize now the mainstream narrative is a lie. The lies can be traced back at least several hundred years. Why are governments lying to us? We trusted this society we grew up in until now. But now we've seen and heard too much and have looked into it to a point where we're forced to understand there is a major conspiracy. We've been forced to question everything, and now we turn to the one source of truth that we have especially relied on and believed, the Bible. If that source was taken away from us, what would we have? Nothing solid or reliable. Thankfully, we do have God's Word. So let's use what we know from the Bible and use logical deduction. We suspect we've been lied to about our history because of the advanced architecture. The ruins are worldwide, and among these ruins are buildings that were left behind that are star forts. We can tell they were used for a military purpose. What need does God's kingdom have for star forts? Absolutely no need. And we can kind of tell from the condition of these forts they were built after Rome. So that seems to fit in with the Bible indication that there would be a world power after Rome, just like the feet, like the prophecy in Daniel 2 indicates, the legs being Rome, the feet being the final world power, which we suspect is Tartaria. Combine that with the Bible's clear indication that, as we mentioned Daniel 2, once God's kingdom begins ruling, it will continue ruling. Also, remember the detail at Isaiah 65:17. And for context, someone called me out on this one time and said this is not pertaining to the future kingdom. But look at verse 17. For here I am creating new heavens and a new earth, for the former things will not be called to mind, neither will they come up into the heart. So yes, in context, what it says here in verses 21 and 22 is absolutely connecting to the new heavens and new earth. So 21, and they will certainly build houses and have occupancy. They will certainly plant vineyards and eat their fruitage. They will not build and someone else have occupancy. They will not plant and someone else do the eating. For the days of a tree, for like the days of a tree, will the days of my people be. And the work of their own hands my chosen ones will use to the full. They will not toil for nothing. They will not bring to birth for disturbance. Factor this in too. How does Satan's little season end? Revelation 29 says that it ends when fire comes down out of heaven and consumes the misled nations that are surrounding or encircling the beloved city and the camp of the holy ones. So if this, then that, again, if we're living during Satan's little season, the very fact that it ends when those who are surrounding God's kingdom are consumed by fire proves and confirms that God's kingdom would be an established reality during Satan's little season. So there's the explanation as to why we who are living during Satan's little season don't see God's kingdom. The nations are hiding it, encircling it. So really, I think most people would agree, from the Bible's perspective, relying on it as our source of true history, it takes us to Rome and then to one final world power after that. That fits in time-wise and explains who built the star forts, not God's kingdom. What about all the other beautiful buildings that were occupied and then completely abandoned and destroyed? Using the Bible as our only true reliable guide, we have to make a choice. And I think we can all agree that it really comes down to just two choices, either or. Either the buildings were built by those whom Christ was ruling over. So if that is what you believe, you would have to conclude that Christ had them built, used them for 1,000 years, then they were, for whatever reason, abandoned and destroyed, or many of them allowed to be destroyed, which wouldn't have been Armageddon, time-wise, if they were built by Christ during the millennium. So that would leave us with a big missing piece of the puzzle. First of all, too, why would Christ do that? Is that what the Bible says Christ will do? No, it doesn't. It says he will rule for 1,000 years, then Satan is let loose. It doesn't indicate he stops ruling. In fact, it says in 1 Corinthians 15, he must rule until the last enemy, death, is brought to nothing. Death is still here. So Christ is still ruling. Second, if the beloved city and camp of the holy ones was here, and now it isn't, where did it go? Satan's little season ends, which we hope is in a very short period of time, a few more years, when those who are surrounding or encircling it are killed. So it has to be somewhere down here, right? The other option, which checks all the boxes, is the one I'm going with. The last world power to rule the whole earth, which seems to be Tartaria, was extraordinary. It was a human government. If Satan actively ruled and guided men, is it impossible to think that they could achieve that level of skill that we see? Bear in mind, some believe humans also were utilizing a form of AI. We know from what we have heard recently about AI how it can quickly take over and help humans achieve virtually impossible tasks. Is it possible that is the reason for the advanced architecture? I believe it has to be just that. Now, reason on this with regard to the AI concept as well. Who's utilizing it now? In this world, Satan. Did he not utilize it then? He certainly could have. So, no other alternate theory, I think, fits in with all the Bible prophecies and checks all the boxes. I asked ChatGPT to help me figure out a population scenario. If the great crowd that came out of the Great Tribulation, and then, of course, were not destroyed by God at Armageddon, were at least 1 million, which I think would represent a very small number compared to how many people lost their lives at Armageddon. If you started with that many people that God began ruling over, and they never died and continued repopulating, what kind of number would we be looking at after 1,000 years? The number ChatGPT came up with was quite surprising to me. 2.2 quintillion. Now, assuming that's correct, that's a massive number. Even if it's billions, we don't see them, do we? I used to believe that perhaps the camp of the Holy Ones or Armageddon survivors were at the northern region. Now I realize that is not likely based on these numbers. Now, if you're new to Flat Earth, let me show you something. Here's a map in my Hammond's World Atlas dated 1967. It shows the continents laid out differently, and this is actually more accurate than the globe map. One of the proofs for the accuracy of the Flat Earth map also is shown in the flight paths. Often when planes are en route and have to make an emergency landing for whatever reason, people are often surprised at why they landed where they did, because it seems like they would have gone out of their way if they're going from point A to point B based on where they end up. However, when you compare those flight routes on a flat Earth map, such as this map, it makes sense. And the plane obviously did not go out of its way to land where it did. Again, proof that the flat Earth map is the accurate map. So too, notice on this where Antarctica is. Do you see how it is all around the continents we are familiar with? This too is accurate. The globe is actually a lie. So Antarctica is every direction south away from north. So what is on the outside or beyond the ice wall of Antarctica? Older maps show more land. Some very much more land. How big is the actual Earth then, you may ask? The true answer is, I don't think anyone knows. I personally believe it goes on, and I would love to know, actually, how big it is. We will know or find out one day, I'm sure. And bear in mind, it's not God or his kingdom that is trying to hide that truth. It is Satan and the actors, his minions or governments, who are in this little part of the world where we are, who want to keep Satan's secret in exchange for his favor, no doubt. So the land on the other side of Antarctica, I believe, is where Christ and his kingdom is currently ruling. I would love to see the architecture of those buildings. And you know what? What if they're not as ornate? What if they're actually more quickly and purposefully and simply built? Would you be let down? I sure wouldn't. I want God's kingdom ruling over me, period. There's so many things we don't know about how God would go about ruling mankind, because right from the start, right from Adam and Eve, things got sidetracked. Knowing God's kingdom is probably out there ruling right now is invigorating, isn't it? That's where our true brothers and sisters are. That's the true society ruled by God. Is it any wonder Satan, during his little season, wants to hide it? There's so much more we can speculate on, but we have to end the video somewhere. If you research Flat Earth, let me end with this. Know this, there is controlled opposition. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye the Science Guy, the Discovery Channel, museums. These are all mainstream narrative sources. For researching Flat Earth, I would recommend getting this app. It is by Flat Earth Dave, who is a prominent full-time lecturer and expert on Flat Earth. His app will help you find many other people in the Flat Earth community. And it really answers virtually all the natural questions that are raised when you consider flat Earth. You don't have to, and you shouldn't, take anybody's word for it. Research it yourself, though. Let me say this too, this may be helpful. As with any topic where it's important to find out the truth and research and make a conclusion, there are minor points and major points, minor proofs and major proofs. For example, the supposed Coriolis effect. Is it detectable? It's actually not, because the Earth isn't actually spinning. It's not a globe and it's not spinning. Some may argue with weak, convoluted arguments that it can be detectable in some way. And at the end of the day, that may be a minor point to you, for example. It may not be that important in establishing if flat Earth is a real thing to you. However, Earth curvature or lack of it is a major point. So perhaps you should start with that major point if you have limited time to research flat Earth. I personally bought a Nikon P1000 camera to see for myself if there is Earth curvature that could be detected. For example, when you see a ship go over the horizon or drop out of sight, did it go over the Earth curve and out of sight? Or is it because of the natural limitation of the eye, the human eye, that it went out of sight and it disappeared bottom up? Well, spoiler alert, when the ship goes completely out of sight, you can zoom it back in with a camera or telescope and bring it right back into sight and actually see further horizon behind it, proving it didn't disappear because of curvature. It was because of the limitation of the human eye. There are many other examples of people doing their own tests with lasers, cameras, telescopes, and it is one of the major proofs we don't live on a globe because there is no curvature. So have fun with your research, and remember, if someone tries to discourage you by saying, "What difference does it make?" If Satan is using governments to hide God's kingdom, I think that makes a pretty big difference. Let me throw this in here to completely finish answering this person's question. The second chart, the thing I disagree with, futurism pushes everything into the future, contradicts at hand and this generation. Therefore, the conclusion is that Jesus came in 70 AD. But again, it wasn't during the rule of Rome. There was another world power. Also, it doesn't contradict this generation. Bear this in mind. Think about this. Jesus gave signs of his presence, his parousia. So the generation that saw the signs would not pass away until all those things occurred. So that being the case, that fits in perfectly. Remember that Jesus gave signs because he became ruler in the heavens invisibly. Revelation chapter 12, the first thing he did after becoming king threw Satan out of heaven. This coincides with, and then it says, Revelation chapter 12, that woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil has come down to you having great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. So that was the beginning of the last days. When the signs were seen, Satan was cast down, and there was a short period of time, and that's why there was bad conditions on earth, and that's why Jesus foretold, and this is in harmony with Revelation 6, the riders of the apocalypse, the white horse being Jesus, given a crown and ruling, beginning his rule amidst his enemies. He was the first rider. What was the very next rider? The one representing war and then famine. So that ties in again with the signs that Jesus gave in Matthew 24. And so the generation that saw those signs would not pass away. And another indication that a little time would go by, add the detail in 2 Thessalonians 5, where it says, whenever it is that they, the nations, are saying peace and security, then sudden destruction will be instantly upon them. So Christ becomes king invisibly in the heavens. That results in Satan being cast out of heaven. That results in wars. But then a time of peace. And again, there's many other prophecies, such as the 10 virgins. Christ likens those who have the heavenly hope, his church, the true church, to 10 virgins. And he says, because the bridegroom would delay, that would be Christ going away for an extended time, they all went to sleep. Then there was the cry, here is the bridegroom. That's would have marked the beginning of the last days. The signs, now the generation at that time sees the signs and realizes Christ is now reigning as king in the heavens. They recognize the signs, but as it indicated, some didn't have enough spiritual oil in their lamps. Also, the talents that were given to the true Christians was an indication by Christ to keep preaching, keep doing the work of the Lord. And again, the indication is that the master of those slaves went away for an extended time. Include this too, the wheat and the weeds. There was a great apostasy that was foretold that would come. The end would not come until that great apostasy came first, a great apostasy. John was alive in 70, and some of the apostles were alive in 70 CE. They were a deterrent for that great apostasy. I believe it wasn't until all of those apostles died that the apostasy set in, and time-wise as well. This allows, too, for Constantine to be part of that great apostasy, which I believe is true. So again, all prophecies and all of Jesus' illustrations point to the fact that it could not have happened as early as 70 AD. And if it's true that John was 90, and I believe the book of Revelation was written in 90 CE, 92 CE, that was well after 70 AD when Rome fell. And John's vision was yet of a future time. His vision was beginning when those signs were seen by the generations, when the last days began. Because he said, I came to be in the Lord's day. That would be when Christ began ruling, but yet it was amidst his enemies for that short period of time. Well, thank you all. I wish everyone success in their search for truth, and I hope you will return for another interesting topic with me.